So the main centerpiece here in the studio is the console, and that is the System 5 MC. And basically it's 32 faders, and it's a big control surface that I use whether I'm in Pro Tools or Logic. And this really allows me to kind of get outside of the box and outside the computer and really focus, especially on the mixing. We've got 32 faders and complete parameter control, so it really allows me to mix more of a large format environment, which I really am accustomed to and prefer. I've also got two workstations. Like I said, I'm usually in Logic or Pro Tools, and I can easily switch between the two, and the surface, the console will actually go back and forth between the two. I've also got some outboard gear. The I/O interface that I use is the Apogee Symphony I/O, and that all runs through the patch bay. Everything's patchable. And I have a 16-channel SSL summing mixer. This allows me to send signal in and out of there and really get a nice warm analog signal. I've also got 8 SSL VHD mic pre's, whether I'm recording vocals or guitars or patching in synths or whatever. Also gives a really clean, warm analog sound. And I've do most of the stuff inside the box in terms of mixing, but I do have a couple compressors like the 1176 and the distressors that are outboard that I'll plug in occasionally. And at EQ, I've got an expounder, which is cool if I want more of an analog sound. I can really get something a little more gritty too. I've also got a couple synths lying around. The Virus B, which I've always loved. Still use that a little bit, not as much anymore. And the Nord. I've always loved the Nord too, great for bass lines and stuff like that. The Triton here is mainly just a controller. I don't really go there for sounds much. I've got some guitars lying around. I really enjoy writing with guitar, whether it's a bass line or coming up with chord progressions. Sometimes I think getting outside of the computer and just kind of writing that way, I can come up with some cooler ideas, and also at the piano as well. In terms of monitors, I've got 2 sets. I have the Atom S3As with a subwoofer. I've also got a pair of Yamaha NS10s and the matching sub, and mostly on the Atoms most of the time, but sometimes go back and forth just to reference on the Yamahas as well. I've also got a second workstation, a little satellite workstation that we can do for collaborating with multiple people, or sometimes just sit over there and come up with ideas if I'm not needing a big console or anything. I've also got the Euphonics Artist Series MC control and MC mix over there too. Gives me some control over there on that station. Wow, what a question. This is kind of the eternal question, I guess, nowadays. I'm more of an optimist, just in the sense that I really feel no matter what, that the good music will find a way out there, and those who really dedicate themselves and give their time and passion to build the craft, we're going to find a home in the music business. Especially now with the globalization and everything online, with Beatport and Sounds to Sample and everything just being accessible 24/7 and being able to get out to the market so fast. I think it's actually kind of an exciting time. Definitely technology wise, with the computer software and everything. It's so much available now for producing music and getting new ideas and new instruments and everything like that. I definitely think too it's very tough, and music business has always been tough. If it was easy, everybody would be making hit records all the time. But I really think that, again, that dedication, putting in the time and never giving up on that, and really not relying on that success in the sense that that has to be the reason why you're doing it in terms of, fame or money or things like that. But if you really genuinely love what you're doing, it's going to show in the music, and ultimately good music is going to find a way to get out there. So, I kind of take a more positive approach to it. Yeah, this is a really great question. I think it's super important for any artist at any level to be involved with the business side. Um, if you're starting out and you're not involved with the business side, you're not going to learn how to help get your music out there. And I think you're going to have a tougher time breaking into the business if you're not actively involved in that type of stuff. And even if you're a huge star and you're not involved in the business, you can end up really getting hurt and, effectively losing everything just because you don't have a clue of what's going on behind the scenes day to day. For a lot of artists that do most things themselves in dance music, that's a lot of times the case. It's very important, and it's tough because you really have to balance that, and sometimes it's a double-edged sword, and you feel quite a bit bipolar. But it is very important. The creativity is such a huge part in the studio. Always coming up with new ideas, and even that requires effort to stay creative and really keep an open mind as to what's going on musically and how your tastes change. But on the business side, I think knowing about different things, whether it's recording contracts or marketing or anything involved with getting your music out there on a professional level, is super important. At the end of the day, it is a business. I mean, I love doing music. It's what I love, but it's also what I do full time, and it's how I make money. So I need to get involved in the business side too, so that I'm not making music with nothing coming back in. So I think it's definitely a huge part. Well, besides the monitors and the computer, I think that the thing I couldn't live without would be a guitar or a piano, because it's that initial spark of the idea and that initial chord progression or melody, to me, that I think is the most important part. And I've actually always been pretty good about coming up with different ways, using different sounds, creating different sounds, using different instruments, to make my music. And I've kind of always been afraid actually to get locked into one certain process, whether it's a program like Logic or Cubase or Pro Tools, or a certain plugin, because I think that that can really narrow you down in terms of your sounds and where you can go with your music. So I've always kind of steered away from going to one particular plugin for the same thing all the time. So I kind of mix it up pretty good. So if I had to pick one, it'd probably be a guitar or a piano. Yeah, so when I start a track, if it's an original track, I'll usually get just a very basic drum reference down, whether it's a kick or a snare, maybe a hi-hat, something really simple, with not a real distinct pattern. And that's really just to provide a foundation to come up with some of the music parts. And I'll go as fast as possible to try to come up with those music parts. And maybe I've already got an idea that I'm trying to get down. So I really try to focus on, those initial music parts first, that core idea, and those initial contrasting sections. That's the most important part. From there, depending on what the melody's doing, depending on what the chords are doing, then I can go back and kind of tweak the drums, make it more, of a signature sound or a signature pattern for that particular track. So mainly just focus on the music parts first. And, interestingly enough, sometimes I'll focus on the sound first and really get like either a bass or a synth sound that I want and spend time really dialing that sound. And sometimes I'll just, try to find the pattern, where sound doesn't even really matter at that point. Whether it's just a simple piano sound or a simple synth sound or a simple bass sound, I'm just trying to come up with those musical parts. And sometimes if I'm kind of stumbling on the music parts, nothing really is hitting for me, then I'll start to design a sound. And likewise, if I'm starting to design a sound and it's really not going anywhere, then I'll try to focus and switch it up so that I'm constantly trying to stay creative and come up with that initial idea. If it's a remix, I'll usually spend the first little bit of time dissecting the original track. And we go into this in huge detail in the art of the remix. Is very important at the beginning, is taking the files that you get, whether it's the acapella or different musical files, and really analyzing them, finding out what key they're in, finding out the tempo, and then getting those prepped and ready for you to go off in your own musical direction for the remix. So if it's a remix, I'll definitely spend time analyzing the original and breaking that down and getting a foundation where I can start. And then once the vocals are lined up, then I kind of go back to, as if it was an original production, come up with a simple beat pattern, write new musical parts, and then come back and maybe add to the beat and just kind of build things up from there. As for monitors and the volume, if I'm being creative and writing, uh, really loud is where it's at. You know, being on the main speakers and just turning it up really loud and getting into the vibe. Obviously, when it comes down to mixing, you know, usually mix at a more medium volume and then reference loud, you know, to make sure the low end and the kick is there. And obviously reference very low, listening for the detail in the vocals and the blend, you know, the overall blend. But, you know, I really think that knowing your monitors is really more important than what monitors you have. Obviously, it's great if we can all go out and get the most expensive monitors. But I think more important than that is knowing what you have. If you have headphones, and that's all you've got, great. Then, you know, you need to learn how your mixes sound on there, and you can reference other people's mixes that you love and see how they sound. Same thing in the car, same thing in whatever monitors you have. You know, I monitor in many different places. I'll monitor on my headphones, listening, you know, on the iPod. I'll listen in the car. I'll listen on my laptop. I've actually got a set of computer speakers that are pretty, you know, revealing for me to hear how everything is sounding. So, you know, I think it's just important to really know your speakers, know your room, and then that'll help you dial in, you know, the sound you're looking for. Um, Biggest barriers I think that new producers face, obviously, is, you know, kicking down that heavy door that is the music industry and trying to really crack in and, you know, get people to take notice, and whether it's a record label or management company. But besides that, you know, I think for producers from a technical aspect, I think the toughest thing is to actually um, remember that really all this stuff, all this gear and all this equipment and all these plugins and all these sounds are really there just to get a creative musical idea out of your head and, you know, recorded and out for the world to hear. And that is it. And I think a lot of producers nowadays focus so much on the latest synth or the latest DAW or sequencing software or the latest, you know, piece of equipment, which is cool. But if you're not getting the results you want musically, if you're not hearing an idea and getting inspired and being able to get that out exactly as you want, that's the bigger thing. And whatever's going to allow you to do that, you know, you need to kind of focus on it. And, you know, we all kind of get caught up in that game of, oh, I got to have that plug-in and I got to have this and that. But, you know, at the end of the day, the most important part is remembering that this is just creative, you know, ideas coming out in a musical way. And the more flexible you can be to stay creative and to get those ideas out with whatever you've got, then, you know, the more successful you'll be and the better your music will be. When it comes to mixing, I think the three things that I really couldn't be without at this point, you know, are the console and the Waves plugins. Really like the Waves plugins, especially the compressors and limiters when it comes to mixing, and some outboard gear. In my case, you know, the SSL mixer and a good mic pre's, because that really allows to kind of send things out. A lot of times I'll send the stereo bus out and print it back in, running through the SSL mixer. So for me, those are the three, you know, important things when it comes to mixing that, you know, I really enjoy, and I guess at this point would be pretty rough without. And I think the hardest thing is knowing when you're done and making that decision that, okay, I'm done. You know, a lot of people overproduce things, overthink things, just go back and back, and, you know, end up losing the original creative idea. And at that point, you know, you kind of lost your way. And I think that that's the most important thing that I personally learned, you know, with my time at the Hit Factory, is watching people like Timbaland and really get an idea, get very fast at, you know, getting it down, recording it, getting it mixed, you know, and keeping the machine moving. I think that that's really one of the most important things. And I think that that's obviously takes time to develop those skills, but, you know, I always tried to work extremely fast and get very fast. And, you know, you always hear people talk about quick keys and, you know, knowing the software. And obviously it's super important, because the quicker you can be at thinking almost in real time and getting the ideas down, whether it's production or mixing, getting everything right the first time and then moving on and really not looking back, you know, is the way to go. You know, I personally don't think that any record is perfect, you know, and I guess, you know, the most perfect records are the ones that just kind of happen, and, you know, you kind of look back and say, yeah, you know, I kind of that just came out of nowhere, or that was an accident or whatever, and it turns into this great spark of idea. I kind of hope that, in however many years down the road, I'm still going after a better and better mix. But I think the decision to say, okay, this one's done, I'm moving on to the next one, is one of the hardest things. I think it's an important thing. So I always try to kind of put that fork in it, when I know, okay, this one's ready to go. So I think there'd actually be two things, and they're completely opposite from each other. The first would be, to never lose sight of the big picture. And, I've learned that after many years. And of course, the big picture is, kind of like I said before, no matter what equipment you have, no matter how the technology changes, no matter how the industry changes, first of all, it's going to change, all of it, tomorrow. But I think, keeping the big picture in mind would be focusing on the music, being able to stay creative, use whatever technology you have at your disposal to make great music, and keep learning how to make great music. And as long as you're staying creative and keeping that big picture in mind, that it's really all about getting these musical ideas recorded out to the world, that's really the most important part. And I think following up with that on the opposite end of the spectrum is just staying in the studio as much as possible, staying creative, and keep working at it, and focusing in on those little details. Whether you're wanting to learn how to EQ or master your tracks better, or want to learn music theory better, I think focusing in on these little details day after day after day, eventually are going to lead up to you really figuring it out for yourself and coming up with your own signature sound. And I think by taking the time to focus in on the little details that you want, and keeping in mind that as long as, your musical ideas are coming out as best your ability, really I think you'll have a great time making music, and I think great things will happen.